Hello, my name's Paul. I remember a story from when I was a child, a thing that happened to us. So I grew up in the northeast of Brazil, and one day we'd gone into town to do our supermarket shop, and we were driving back from town along the main road, and it was the middle of nowhere, just a tarmac road going through the middle of nowhere. And I remember on the right side of the road, suddenly there was this man who was collapsed on the roadside, face down in the roadside, and it's night time. And my dad did something strange. He didn't stop to help the man, he didn't even go near the man. He turned the car around in the road, and we headed back into town. So drove back into town, probably another 10 or 15 minutes, and as you came into the town, on the left hand side there was a police station. And so my dad went in, spoke with the police, and a whole load of these big policemen with guns came out. And they came with us along the road to where this man was collapsed. And they went up to him. It turns out the man was just drunk. He'd had way too much to drink and he'd collapsed on his way home, and the police helped him along his way. Now, why did all that happen? It's a bit strange, maybe a bit unchristian of my dad. Why didn't he just help the guy? There's a good reason for it. The reason is that one of the strategies that drug gangs would use in the area is they would use someone collapsed, and then they would take advantage of the Good Samaritan effect. So if someone well-meaning, like my dad, had stopped to help the man, and you get out of your car, and then gang members in the bushes behind could jump out with their guns and rob you in the middle of nowhere. So you're a vulnerable person suddenly in the middle of nowhere in a situation you can't deal with. Where am I going with this? Am I writing off the story of the Good Samaritan? Not exactly. At the beginning of this year, on the 22nd of March, I was due to be preaching on the next passage in Philippians. I've been speaking at Sutton Baptist, and the next verses I was going to preach on as I worked through Philippians were Philippians 4, verses 6 and 7. And they say this: "Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus." So I was due to speak on that on the 22nd of March. Turns out 23rd of March was the day that we went into national lockdown because of coronavirus, and so that sermon never happened. But since then, and I do hope to preach on that at some point when we've come through this, but since then those verses have been in my head. What does it mean? Why is God telling us in his word to not be anxious? Why is there this command there, don't be anxious? How does that work? How do you begin to live that out? I think it's important to say that, firstly, these verses are acknowledging that there are going to be things that make us feel anxious and worried. But then it's telling us, do not be anxious. Do not be anxious, do not carry on being anxious, divided on the inside. And how does that work? How do we do that? How do I look at these verses? I'm still not entirely sure. But I've been thinking about them over the last few months. And I think a helpful way probably to look at them is in the same way that you'd look at a man collapsed on the roadside in Brazil. Where am I going with this? So my dad saw this man collapsed on the roadside. He's there, it's a problem, he could be in trouble. But my dad didn't try to solve the problem by himself. He went back and got the police, the big heavies with the guns. And I think that's sort of what this verse is saying. It's saying, as you go along the road of life, you're going to come across things that make you worried, that make you anxious. That's the same for all human beings. What do you then do in that situation? What these verses are saying is that by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests, let the things that you need help with, be made known to God. In other words, get God involved in the situation. In the same way that my dad got the police involved in the situation with this man collapsed on the roadside. Don't get yourself into a situation with your worry, with things that make you anxious, where you're too far in to deal with it by yourself. Get God involved. I think that's what these verses are saying. And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will then guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. I think that's what these verses are getting at. It's not saying, don't you dare be anxious. Now you're a Christian, you need to be steadfast and sure of yourself and strong. I think it's saying, as you go along the road of life and things come along that start to make you feel worried and anxious, don't deal with them on your own. Let God get involved with you. Let his peace guard your heart and your mind as you enter into these things. I think that's what these verses are getting at. I watched recently the video Elaine Stafford recorded. You can find it on YouTube. It's Contentment in a Changing World. Elaine's part of our church. And I found that really helpful, just practical advice of someone who's been through a situation where there is a lot of anxiety and worry, and how you deal with that, how you use Thanksgiving as a tool in that. I really recommend that to you as something to watch next. But maybe now, as we head into more lockdown, more problems with coronavirus, I don't know what's making you feel anxious. Why not use these verses as a reminder to get God involved? Actually, this morning, as I was preparing this, I had a situation where my work got in touch, this really stressful situation to do with self-isolation and what was going to happen, and there's this really stressful situation going in my head, and I'm trying to sort it out, and just, you're in a mess. And I remembered I'm actually giving this devotional, don't try and tackle things that make you anxious on your own. Get God involved. And it was a really helpful reminder to just stop and say, actually, God, would you please help me in this situation? And he did, as a matter of fact. He helped me feel a lot less anxious, and the situation got sorted out. Anyway, whatever you're going through, I hope you find these verses helpful and encouraging. God bless you. I'm missing you all.